but it is a good time. I would recommend definitely seeing it in the theater. And this is going to be a little unusual for me. I'm not recommending seeing this one in the theater because you have to see it before it gets out of theater, which is usually my recommendation for seeing it in the theater. I'm recommending seeing this one in theater for the same reason that I'd recommend seeing a lot of horror movies in theater, which is that a horror movie outside of the theater isn't really a horror movie. Like, part of the horror experience is being in an unfamiliar environment with people you don't really know in the darkness, and that whole circumstance, even though there is like a veil of safety or whatever, however much you want to buy into that, that's there, but just under the surface, in the back of your mind that anything could go down in this theater while you're watching a horror movie. So the reason I recommend seeing horror movies, the good ones anyway, in theater, is not because you should see them before they leave the theater, but because seeing them in the theaters adds something that seeing them out of the theater will not. And for Rock of Ages, the loud music, the glitz, the glamour, the epic choreography, which it definitely has a lot of epic choreography, all these things require that you see this movie in the theaters. If you don't see it in the theaters, it's probably not going to be that good at all, unless you have a really, really nice sound set up at your home theater. So I'm going to give Rock of Ages, see it in theater, but not because it's awesome. See it in theaters because if you don't see it in theaters, it most assuredly will not be awesome. But definitely a good time, good movie. I'd recommend you check it out. And then the last movie I want to talk about, this is the only one out of today's list that I was really, really waiting for a long time, and came out, and, well, I'll just tell you about it once we introduce it. It is Prometheus. Now, there is some amount of contention on the interwebs about what exactly Prometheus is. A lot of people say it is a prequel to the Alien movies, and a lot of people say it is not necessarily a prequel. It just exists in the same universe as the Alien movies. And those people kind of look at, like, like all the Star Wars stuff that happens after Episode 6, like all the books, or animated series or whatever, or before it, how these things aren't necessarily sequels or prequels to the original series. They just exist in the same universe. So there is a big number of people who say that this is also true of Prometheus, that it exists in the same universe of Alien, but isn't really a part of the Alien series. I'm not going to really speak to that because it's up in the air, if you ask me. I understand the arguments on both sides, but if I had to come down on one side or the other, I'd say Prometheus exists in the same universe, but is likely not a prequel, just because there's not enough overlap for me between Prometheus and the Alien movies to definitely call it a prequel. It doesn't fulfill my very subjective criteria, which I admit is very subjective, but it just doesn't fulfill my criteria. But that's not really what's important about this movie to me. What's important about this movie to me is, A, it's Ridley Scott coming back to sci-fi, which we've all been waiting for, because Alien scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. It's one of the most, visually moving, and Aliens, I'm a huge Aliens fan, too, for the same reason. These movies are just, so ingrained in our classical lexicon of what is science fiction, that it's hard to really talk about science fiction in America, in cinema, without mentioning them. That's how good they are. So you take all that, and then you say, well, the same guy who made those, or Alien, rather, the same guy who made Alien, because he didn't do Aliens, is coming back to do something that exists in the same universe. He's got access to all sorts of technology they didn't have when Alien was being made, which means, as visually stunning as Alien was, now we've got a chance to really take it up a notch. He's developed a lot as a filmmaker, and especially in terms of dramatic filmmaking. He has learned a lot since he made Alien about characters and story arcs and how you weave characters together and big casts. He's learned a lot about big casts since then. Needless to say, I was really fucking excited for this movie, as were a lot of people, and damn it if I wasn't disappointed. It's not that it's a bad movie, because it's not. It's that it's not a great movie, because it's not. I've seen a lot of people, giving their reviews on Prometheus, and a lot of people talking about sort of the, philosophical undertones of what's going on in this movie, and they attribute those undertones to its greatness, because you don't usually see those undertones in contemporary popular American cinema, right? So I think that's true to an extent, but then you've got movies like Inception, you know? Inception isn't just great because of the philosophical undertones that are in Inception. Inception is great because at its core, it is a story about one man trying to overcome his past and being unable to do that, and the struggle to reconcile that past in such a way that he can return to what he knows will make him happy. It's ultimately a story about a journey with a character that you empathize with, a journey with a character that raises all these philosophical undertones, but that's not the core of his motivation. He doesn't do, in Inception, he doesn't do the whole, you know, memory stealing thing or implantation thing because its philosophical undertones are appealing to him. He does them so he can get back to his children. At the core of that movie is a good, solid, believable storyline that most viewers can, in some way, connect with. This is not true in Prometheus. In Prometheus, the primary storyline, at least the one that's presented in the intro and the first act, is about these two people whose relationship, you know, they're supposedly married or together, I'm not really sure, but one is played by who delivered the best performance in the entire movie. Noomi Rapace played Elizabeth Shaw, and then her lover, who was far, far less memorable, I assure you, was played by Logan Marshall Green, and he played a character named Charlie. So A, I never really bought the relationship between those two. B, their core motivation for doing what they're doing is not some, like, deep-seated emotional, crux that they really have to seek out so that they can reconcile some whatever. It's nothing like that. It is simply curiosity, simply wanting to know the truth. And that's where the philosophical undertones come out. Now, I'm not saying that inherently is a problem. I'm saying that there is a problem with that inherently. And the problem with that is it's not subtle at all. It very clearly points out where you should be looking. It very clearly points out what you should be thinking. Now, the success of a movie like Alien is, yes, it's action-packed. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's in space. But these sort of philosophical undertones are more resonance than direct, being told what to think. It's more, the more you think about it, the more you start wondering, all the questions that Alien brings out. Prometheus, it doesn't leave you to wonder that because it throws all those questions at you. Very much so. I mean, there's a character in the movie who, or probably two characters in the movie, one played by Michael Fassbender, I'd say the second best performance in the movie, plays like an android named David, and the other was Guy Pearce, who played the leader of the Weyland Corporation, Peter Weyland. Both of those guys pretty much only exist to pose like philosophical questions. And, that's all well and good, but it's not very entertaining, and you don't, or maybe, the explosions and the deaths and all that, that's entertaining. But the thing is, just for my money, philosophical undertones are better when they are found in resonance, not when they are at the core of a character's motivation. Then it sort of falls flat, because not everybody, in fact, I would venture to say not even a majority of people would consider, understanding some sort of philosophical, truth as the core motivation for their, entire life path. That's those sorts of people are a very, very small subsect, and those sorts of stories are not as emotionally charged to me as the sorts of stories where characters are more focused on what they feel. So Prometheus, while it was gorgeous, there's no doubt about it, it was gorgeous in terms of visual, wonder and just pure, like, awe. It blows Alien out of the water. No contest. But in terms of storyline, the storyline, I don't feel it. I never really connected with anybody. A lot of characters are there only to be expendable, and it's pretty obvious. An entire, like, sub-storyline that started either late Act 2 or early Act 3 between Charlize Theron, He gives an alright performance. And Guy Pearce, you could have done away with it. It happened way too late in the movie to have any sort of emotional connection. And the aliens themselves, I mean, all that was good. On the surface, the action and all that was really, really nice. It's just once you got below that surface, once you got below the action, once you got below the visuals, once you started feeling the storyline, which is what I really want to feel in a Ridley Scott movie, there's nothing really to grapple onto. So it's a movie that only appeals to, one part of your brain, and that's the intellectual part. And, that's going to do it for some movie viewers. For me, didn't feel it, wasn't there. So that will wrap up our media section for the day. Like I said, we will definitely be coming back to media, and we'll be doing more than movies in the future. I've played a lot of Diablo 3, and I actually wrote a review for Diablo 3 already on tvice.com. But I wrote that review before I really got too deep in the advanced difficulties and stuff like that. So I am planning to do a fuller, more in-depth Diablo 3 review here in the podcast, probably next week. If there's a next week, we'll see. I'm not really sure how often this thing's going to be going off. It kind of depends on if people fucking like it. I don't know. So I do plan on doing the Diablo 3 review. I also kind of want to do two things. I kind of want to do a Hunger Games movie-book comparison. I don't want to do that, though, until I finish all of the books. Currently, let me take a look here. I happen to have Mockingjay, the third book, right next to me. I'm 32 pages into the third book. Finished the second book yesterday. I want to finish the whole series before I start doing that, because I want to know what's important in the first book that's not in the first movie, or what they moved around from in the first movie that's actually in the second book or the third book, things like that. I want to know all that before I give a full comparison of the book versus movie. Something else I kind of want to do, Assassin's Creed 3 is going to be dropping, I think, in the winter, and I've just now finished playing Assassin's Creed Revelations, so I really want to do a background story, sort of an anticipatory, here's what you can expect from Assassin's Creed 3, here's what Assassin's Creed 1, 2, Brotherhood, and Revelations have been like. I didn't play the Facebook or the what was it on, I don't know, Vita or some shit, I don't know, whatever those games were on. I didn't play those games because who the fuck cares. So I wanted to talk about those in the future, and I am completely open to any sort of other suggestions. I play tons of games, I read tons of books, I watch tons of movies. So if there's anything you want me to talk about, feel free to holler at me. I'll give you my contact information at the end of the show. But before we end, let's move on to Ire.